Hello, and welcome to another episode of Try This First. This is the series where I talk to nonprofit experts and we talk about specific challenges or approaches or philosophies. And the most important thing is we try to figure out where to start first because sometimes we are hesitant to get started. We want things to be perfect. We want to have a ton more experience or a ton more resources. And in my experience, it's way more important to get started. The missions that we're representing need our help. They need us to be engaged and they need it right now. So don't wait for perfect. Let's get started today. And today we're going to talk about marketing and communications, which is a huge topic. It usually takes up, like a whole multiple years of learning and professional experience. We're going to like jam it into like 30 minutes and just get it done. Um, Marketing and communications are go hand in hand with fundraising, and you can't be successful fundraiser and can't have a successful fundraising program if you're not telling the story of your mission. And that's really one of the things we want to talk about. So joining me today is Gladys Hernandez from Mixte Communications. And not only is Gladys a fantastic communicator, but Gladys and I worked together for like 8 years at Habitat for Humanity of Orange County and had some great strange times doing lots of fundraising and communications work. And I'm absolutely thrilled to create an entire excuse to come up with to spend time with Gladys again. So Gladys, if someone is really ready to get serious and get involved and communicate about their mission and get involved with this work, what should they try first?
Thanks for having me, Chris. That time with you really helped me get to this point where I can share these tips. I learned a lot during that time. So first, great question. First thing they should do is resist the urge to jump into the tactics and skip the strategy, right? When we're so close to the mission, we skip that part. We think we can go straight into it. I know the mission. I know all the things. I know the stories. Let's get to it. But we need to think through the why, the who, etc. So what should you do instead? First, take time to gather insights and listen. This is a critical step. We at Mixte, we recommend you do some or all of the following, right? We know not everybody has the bandwidth to do all these things, but here are some things that we could do. You can hold a listening session with your executive team or program directors and ask questions like, what's working with their communications or fundraising? What keeps you up at night around our communications or fundraising? What do you wish we could be doing with our fundraising and or communications efforts? If you can't meet with the team, you can scan your social media channels for trends and look for things like which posts get responses? How is your brand represented? How often do you post on a given channel? And if you do get comments, do you see trends or through lines in them, right? Like is a certain post around a family story getting a lot of comments or engagement, or a special event that gets a lot of engagement? Look at that. See the trends. If you do social media, review your media coverage and look for things like what type of media coverage do you receive? Is your organization only mentioned, or are you the focus of the story? And lastly, you can review your website analytics and look for things like how much website traffic do you have? Where does it come from? Are those Google ads paying off? Is it at social media? What are the top 3 most visited pages? Are any of those pages around your fundraising? Do you see spikes? And what caused those spikes in traffic? What is your bounce rate and time on website, right? How many people are actually landing on your page and staying? Okay, now that we listened, we looked at all that data, now we draft our insights. We have all this information, what are we gonna do with it? Now, whether you go through all those steps or just one, or you simply sit down and anecdotally, you write down some of the things that you're witnessing trends. You draft these more casually off, you could draft them casually off the top of your head.
Mm-hmm.
And you could try to do the following 4 things. Organize the trends by causes for optimism. What do you do well? Opportunities to grow. Where can you do better? things to consider, situational context that may impact your outcomes. Did you get a matching gift that was like $1 million 1 year? That is a situational thing. And things we don't know. As you mentioned, like that you said, don't let perfect be the enemy of done, right? Items that you expect to crystallize at a later date, we can put those in the things we don't know, right? We might be getting that matching gift again, maybe not. And you try to find 3 to 6 items for each the causes for optimism and opportunities to grow sections. 3 to 6 is good. Limit both things to consider and things we don't know to no more than 2 items each. That's it. That's all we need to know.
Okay.
Also, use no more than 100 words. They should be short and sweet. We don't need a dissertation here, right? Because we can spend a lot of time there. But we just need a couple of words. Once we have our insights, then we move into understanding your audiences. This is a fun part for me because how many times, right? We have a campaign and we hear anyone with money is our audience, or everyone in our service area is our audience, right?
Everybody.
Yeah. If you've got money, I want you. Yep. Yeah. And this guidance only leads to general messaging that usually misses the mark and does not meet the campaign goals. So here's what I suggest. Identify priority audiences, meaning the top 4 to 5 that are important for the organization to speak to strategically, or where you want to focus. The more specific you can be, the easier it will be to develop your messaging and your marketing plan, right? So you could say a board member that's been with the org for less than 2 years, only gives the minimum, get more specific, get into the nitty gritty of that.
Yeah.
Once you identify your audiences, think through their needs and interests. And you can do this using your knowledge of someone within your organization. You could think about that one board member, think about what moves them, when have they shown up to an event, how do they engage with the organization, have you had a discussion with them, what are their interests, and use that information to build your audience. Or if you don't know a lot about a particular audience, maybe it's a goal audience, you can use publicly available data about that target audience segment. Googling online. And once you do this, you can cultivate a clear picture of who you're talking to, and in turn, how you get them to take the action you want. And then lastly, we think about the journey that they're taking with you. And when you do that, you build long-term supporters for long-term change, right? And so where are these audiences in the journey with your organization? I mentioned a board member. And so if a board member is a part of your priority audiences, then we know that they are ambassadors and they won't need much to move them to action. But perhaps you want to move a social media follower to attend an event. Then we know there will need to be a lot more done there to move them to action. And understanding your audiences and their journeys within your organization directly informs the messaging you use, the kind of impact stories you select, how you target social media ads, and beyond. Because before you know what you want to say, you have to know who you're talking to. So you've done your homework, you listened, you looked at your data, you identified your top priority audiences, which is hard to do, to limit it to 4 to 5. You look at their journey within your organization, and now you can get to the tactics. You can do, am I going to use social media? Email blasts. What stories will you tell? What programs will you highlight? You'll be able to identify these things now that you know more about your audience. And keeping them top of mind will lead to higher success rates in your campaigns, marketing efforts, etc. So that's what I suggest, right? Before we get to the fun stuff, do your homework.
I love that. And a couple things. First off, a little behind the scenes. When we started this call, Gladys said, I don't know if I've got enough information to share. So I think clearly she's got a ton. Second off, there's really, there's 10 episodes in this series, and I've recorded them all in advance, and they're going to be, shared in a particular order. But hearing some really interesting echoes between different kind of experts that I'm talking to. Like you talked about, get the strategy before the tactics. Like if you're ready to start doing this work, you don't just start posting and hope that works. You don't, you got to get that strategy down. That's very similar to what Sarah talked about when we talked about grants. Like before you start writing grants, you got to have a budget, you got to have goals, you got to have all this programmatic information. Same thing when we talk with Mary about special events. Don't just say we're going to do an event. You have to do the work and figure out, well, what do we want to achieve? Who's our audience? All this stuff. And huge connection, which probably won't surprise you given our work together. When I was talking with Chris from What If, he was talking about the importance of identifying your ideal donor avatar, which
Mm,
is, I'm hearing those echoes. And what you're talking about is really identifying your priority audience. Who's the person you most want to be speaking to, be connecting with, and having that person in mind before you start, writing a social media campaign or recording a video or making your CEO do a TikTok dance. You're like, well, wait a minute, like
yeah.
those might all work, but you've got to get that work done first. And that's so important. I also loved the idea of thinking about the journey that an individual might be taking with your organization. Help me understand that. Are you talking about like they might be a volunteer or they might be a donor, or how does that look from your perspective?
Yeah. Um, First, I want to call out the other Chris and creating a donor avatar. At Mixte, we have something called our Mixte Momentum model. It's a model that walks clients through how to move their audiences to a point of action. And one of the points that we do there is audience personas. So
Oh,
it's similar to a donor avatar.
yeah.
Give a picture, an age where they live, and we put their interests and needs there. So that's funny that Chris mentioned that. Um, Journeys. Well, what's going to move somebody to? We're talking about fundraising, somebody to donate, right?
Hmm.
I need to trust this organization. Trust is what's going to get somebody to move to action, right?
Okay,
That's
yeah,
it.
yeah.
And so they have to, where are they in their journey in terms of their relationship with the organization? Am I somebody who is a social media follower? I've not attended your events, but I'm interested. I'm realizing that there is an issue in my community, and that's why I follow your nonprofit because you're
Hmm.
helping solve this issue that has impacted me or somebody that I know. I'm learning about you, but I'm not there yet. You still have to nurture our relationship. And that's what I talk about in the journey. So they're very early in their journey with you, and there's more steps that need to be taken to bring them along that journey to action. I'm a board member. I'm bought in. I love
Yeah.
this organization. I donate, I give, but why am I not bringing my network in? Right? That's the next step. And so you figure out where they are on their journey. And here's the fun part is that it continues. It continues because now that board member, let's say their action was to bring in somebody from their network. Okay. Now that person gets to go through that journey again, where we walk
Hmm.
them from learning about us to building trust and moving them to action. And it keeps going as we move out as a ripple effect through the community, through their network.
Well, okay. I love that as well. And here's why. There's such a really, and I've always said that, like, fundraising and marketing hand in hand. Sometimes I call them like their cousins or their, roommates. Like they really go, together. And because what you're talking about on the fundraising side, we talk about that too. We talk about this individual in discovery, or we're doing cultivation with this person where we are giving them opportunities to connect with the mission. We're giving them opportunities to see their values reflected in our work. And we're doing all that before you do, in the fundraising case, the solicitation, the ask, the actual call to action. And so there's all these parallels here where you can't just, I mean, you can, but you won't be successful if you just open the door and be like, "Hi, give to us." Or if
Mm-hmm.
if your marketing campaign is just like, everybody's going to want to give to us, so we're just going to, get as many eyes on it, and we'll just ask, and that'll work. And I think the common thread here is organizations sometimes forget that the merit of their mission alone isn't enough.
Mm.
even if you're doing great work, like you said, they have to
Mhm.
trust you. They have to trust that you're doing what you say you're going to do. You're treating people the right way.
Exactly.
You're an advocate. And I mean, all the things that we evaluate brands or people that we want to associate with, there's trust there. And our messaging has to do that work as well. And the other thing that I'm taking notes. So sometimes I look off camera because I'm a paper and pen guy. I loved in your first step, you had two really distinct calls to action or things to do. That the first was you talked about listening, about being very, and that's very relational work. That's talking to your stakeholders or your colleagues and doing that. But then you had there was data too that you were recommending people look at, like the website traffic and what are people doing when they come to your website, what posts are getting what kind of interaction on social media. So I love that combination um of listening and the data, that kind of art and science of doing both. So I've got no follow-up question yet. I'm so excited about this
Well,
stuff because it's so kind of in tandem with what we know about how donations need to come in, how donor relationships work. It's really amazing stuff.
yeah, and we can see the connection with between fundraising and marketing. And yet, how often are they two separate departments working in silos who might even have separate plans,
Mm-hmm.
working on different strategic plans?
Yeah.
How do we connect that? And how we're so connected with each other.
Yeah.
Um, the events group, fundraising, all of that connected. But I have seen many a times different uh, plans out there, different goals. So sometimes that's just the way organizations built. That's why we invite the listening section part, because it's ask them, what are you working on? What are your goals? What are
Mm-hmm.
overall our organizational goals? And is this campaign going to feed into that? How is it going to support that? Because all of it needs to come together, or else
Right.
this event won't help feed to this thing. So it it seems very basic, like I'm just going to have a meeting and ask questions, but it's important because we understand that everybody has different goals, and this is a way of bringing us together and maximizing the success. If that team knows what I'm working on, if I'm listening to them, their goals, if together we identify the priority audiences, um, then we're all working together and meeting those numbers, hopefully,
Yeah.
right? Because
And
like if I'm it's not just social media campaign, it's something that could lead to more donors, more event
right.
attendees, more program participants.
And none of these things, be it fundraising or marketing tactics, none of those things live in a vacuum. They're not, like you said, we're not doing it just for the sake of doing it.
Right.
We're doing it so we can get more support and ultimately so we can serve the people that we're trying to serve or connect with the people we want to connect with and make the mission a reality. And it's one of the challenges I think organizations have is inside the organization, there's maybe silos, or maybe silos
Hmm.
is too aggressive a word. Maybe it's just like we've got experts, like a fundraising expert and a marketing expert,
Right. Yes.
and from the inside perspective, they're very different things with very different goals. But from the outside perspective, a potential donor doesn't look at a message from a company and be like, oh, that's clearly a message from the marketing team. Oh, but this is a message from the fundraising team, so I'm going to treat them differently. Like right there, it's one cause, and that's what they're so that kind of methodology or that kind of ethos has to be in play where it has to serve the larger mission. It can't just be for its own sake.
Yeah, and the data component also just helps us to have KPIs, right? How do we measure success? And so if we see our baseline also for website traffic, for social media engagement, we can then see the success. So perhaps we didn't bring in the dollars, but we grew our social media by this much, which will lead to more people seeing our content about our program, about other things, right? So there's
Mhm.
different ways to measure success. And the data is very important to not only look at trends, but also to establish KPIs.
And that's I want to touch on that real quick. It's a little off topic, but that's never stopped me. So thinking about goal setting, like goal setting for fund development is usually pretty straightforward. Like we need X dollars. How much do we have? Or, how many meetings do you have? But But goal setting for marketing tactics or marketing efforts strikes me as something a little more complicated because no one ever, in my experience, no one ever makes a donation and says, "Oh, by the way, I'm giving because I really like that last video campaign that you put out." Like, I wish they would, but no one's ever said to me like, "Oh yeah, that's why I gave." So tell me a little bit about your experience about like how nonprofits are setting goals or should be setting goals around these topics.
Yeah, in the absence of this fundraising goal, our goal is to move people through the journey, to move
Hmm.
them a step closer to action, right? So you're right. Perhaps we can't directly link that video to success, but they engage with that video, and what did they do next?
Hmm.
This person has been liking all of our posts. That's because I know that because I'm looking at the data.
Yeah.
And here they are. They just came to our event. And because we ask, as a great organization, everybody who attends our events to share about them being here, tag us. Now I see that this person also attended an event and they tagged themselves there. They shared content from that event. Boom. I moved them to the next level. Now they're at our events. And I can make that connection, right? But
Right.
you need to know the data. You need to watch them. But definitely you can move them from just being a social media follower to now they're generating content
Mm.
for you on their social media. And now we have access to their network. That's growth.
Yeah.
Um, but thinking about your goals and establishing that, and again, it might not be fundraising dollars, but we want more engagement, we want more impressions, we want more followers, and asking ourselves why. Because followers always seems like the easiest thing, right? I want more people following me. But would you rather have 1 million people following you or 10,000 truly engaged people who resonate with your mission, who share it, who invite their network to participate in your events, who donate? That's what you really want, right? That number looks great, but if they're not seeing also we know that sometimes they don't see all your posts. That's just a number that looks good.
Yeah.
We want engaged people.
It sounds like when I first started in this work, people were measuring website success based on hits. Like that was the number. Like how many hits did your website get? Old school websites used to have a hit counter like
Yes.
on their page. You'd be like, "Ooh, look at all." And yeah, but it wasn't until later people realized, well, that's not doesn't tell me anything. But it's an interesting piece of data, but it's not actionable. Followers, very similar. Like, oh, it's interesting. And a big number sounds good. We all like reporting big numbers to our boards, but yeah, to your point, 1 million followers who don't do anything but just have clicked follow once upon a time and maybe like me, they're, a constant lurker and, very, very infrequently engaged with anything on Instagram. So yeah, I got a lot of people I follow, but I don't think they can count on me like for anything. So who are the people we can count on? Who are the people who are
Hmm.
going on that journey? I love that. Fundraising used to have, or it still does, they would talk about moves management. Like how are we moving a donor from one thing to another? And
Yeah.
I'm always a little iffy on that terminology because it does sound a little bit like I'm like making you do a thing, like come here, like we're gonna go over here now. But journey, I think, sounds a little bit more um there's a little more agency involved there. So
Yeah,
um,
and that's the big thing is keeping them in mind. What's going to
mhm,
move them? What
mhm.
are they interested in? What are their needs? And showing up for them. Um, and they'll show up for you if you do that, right? Keeping them in mind.
That's right. That's right. Excellent. So someone who's really thinking about getting more serious or putting their arms around. Sometimes I'm imagine thinking about, imagining who's our viewer for this. Sometimes I'm imagining someone who is maybe new to a leadership role within a nonprofit and they've got all this responsibility in front of them and they're thinking, okay, now I'm looking at my marketing function. How do I move the needle? So I love what you're talking about in terms of like really understanding where you are, doing those listening tours, looking at that data, understanding what those issues are, identifying, I think you called it the areas for optimism and the areas for opportunity. Like, what are we really proud about? What are we really crushing? And what can we be better at? And I also love that you're balancing those two because if you spend all day, like
Hmm.
sometimes you'll do a SWOT analysis and the net effect of that will just be like, I don't know what we're doing because look at all these things that are challenges to us and I don't know how to get there. So having that balance, I think, is important too.
Also, you can get bogged down by all the weaknesses, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then end up talking yourself out of doing certain things. Like, okay, well, it didn't work back then. You know what? That nope, we're not really good at social media. We're not really good. That's why we limit that because it might have not worked then, but what can we do different now to make it work this time?
Yes. And that, I think that that raises an interesting point, or at least something that has helped me in my career is I have sometimes really overestimated how my communications were received. And what I mean by that is like, I've had arguments, maybe even with you. I've had arguments where it's been like, well, we can't run this newsletter article in April because we ran a very similar newsletter article in February. And surely the donors will they'll read it and they'll just be shocked and be like, why are we, what is this nonsense? Like, see what I'm saying? Like really
Yeah,
overestimating or overvaluing it when reality is like it's probably fine. Like they may not have read it, they may not remember. It may be a good story to repeat, like some stories you repeat. So having that mentality in mind too, I think is important. You've got to get out there. You can't be completely governed by your past. If you've done something and it didn't work, what can we learn from it? Was it that thing? Was it the timing? Was it the vehicle? Other things at play. But yeah, really
yeah.
having a more realistic view of how these things are received, I think is helpful too.
Yeah, you may want me to hit that very large donate button on the newsletter, but perhaps I am always, every time, clicking on that family story. That's what
Mhm.
I want, maybe. Just keep giving me more of that. Give me more
Yeah.
of that. Give me what I want, and I will give you what you want. At the
Yep.
end of the year, I will donate because I love those stories, right?
Yep. But it's
Yeah,
on your
that's what
timeline.
analytics,
Yeah.
exactly. Analytics kind of give you that, and it's keeping me in mind. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so important. It's so overwhelming too, because there's so many like I said at the top of the call, like, do you do a post or a video or make your CEO do a TikTok dance? Like, how do
Yeah.
you, is it all about the audience? Does the audience question help you really figure out what tactic to do? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, because it's very easy to get swayed because we're always looking at what our neighbors doing, right? Like
Hmm.
they just got that big donation. Or did you see them on TikTok? They started a TikTok. We need a TikTok, right? So
Hmm.
we look at the things, we see this similar organization, and that's what they're doing. We got to do that. But that's where the data and the listening that brings you back. Like, okay, we're not them. Also, they have a younger audience and they can do the thing. Our audience is not on TikTok. Why am I putting together making my I mean, maybe for myself it's fun to see my CEO do a TikTok video, but that is might not be what your audience wants. I don't want that.
Yeah.
I might want you to always give me data on your programs and who you're serving. That's what I want. Like, how many people are you moving uh, to the next thing? That's what I want. Okay, if you're making a big impact, I'll donate to that.
Yeah.
But you don't know that unless you think about your audience and what they're interested in, right? And putting their needs and interests first, or else you could get swayed by all the cute things, the next social media trend, um, email blasts and just blasting people,
Hmm.
shoving information down their throat that we want
Hmm.
them to consume, and that doesn't lead to them moving through your journey, right? Not
Yeah.
moving them through action. I mean, I'm signed up for all the newsletters. I don't partake and engage with all of them. I have my favorites because I know that
Sure.
they, maybe I like myself an infographic, my friend. So if I'm on anybody's email list, know that about me. Give me an infographic and yes, open and I will probably save it. That's also, also when you think about your KPIs, I mentioned followers, but
Hmm.
how many of your followers are actually saving? That's a new
Yeah.
KPI, saving your content. That means I trust you. Like,
Yeah.
oh, here's this. I'm going to need to save this because I'm going to reference this later. That's important.
It's really so when we're thinking about our audiences then, or our ideal audiences, I imagine some of that data is going to come from like looking at your donor database and seeing like, well, who's in our neighborhood? Who are the people in our neighborhood right now? And you can make some you can make some assumptions about good tactics based on what you know about these folks, like their ages. Wait, if your donor base is all 55 up, yeah, TikTok's probably not a great way to invest your time. You never know. They might be like a cool, like a hip guy out there, but for the most part, um, so that's really, I would also like when you're talking about listening, I'm jumping all around, but when you're talking about listening to your like having those listening tours, is that a conversation you can be having with like donors and other volunteers, not just board members or executives? Can you be having those conversations about how your messages are landing in other rooms like that?
I mean, definitely you could do focus groups,
Yeah.
and that could come in when you're identifying audiences, right? We have this idea. We've got a board member. Pick one that you trust and ask them, like, uh, this is just a made up name, Bob. I see that you've been engaged for 20 years, but you don't attend our events. Is there a reason why?
Hmm.
And we can learn that maybe it's just it's very situational. Bob has a sick wife at home and he doesn't partake or whatever. So it's not us, it's him. Or he can say, well, you make them all in this part of the city. I can't make it.
Right.
It's
Right.
so that's very situational. But learning more about these audiences, doing focus groups, if you have groups that you trust, if there is a donor that you can do a focus group or somebody who is within your network that you can ask these questions and you trusted, I would suggest that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But sometimes we don't have access to these audiences, right? And but instinctually with our knowledge of your organization, you have that information. You see, how do these events do? How do people react? How many people move to action? And sometimes we don't like the answer, right?
Yeah,
We
that's
we,
true.
we really love an event, and it's time to have that conversation, right? When we think about like, I don't think this is what our audience wants. They're not
Yep.
showing up, or we're not giving them what they want. We're
Hmm.
not doing what they're looking for.
Yeah.
And as you suggested, those focus groups could help having those conversations there and learning more about them. Listening, usually it's when we're thinking about early on putting a campaign, it's bringing in your executive team or board members, whomever, stakeholders. What do we really want to accomplish? What
Hmm.
are we worried about? What do we want to do, and how? And that brings alignment, right? And then we could
Yeah.
tap into like, okay, what is there something that you're doing in events that could be our CTA? That's our call to action that we want to drive people to, right? The question you posed was one of storytelling about your mission.
Hmm.
And what do we want them to do at the end of the day? What's
Yes.
the call to action? Sure, it could be donate or and by the way, each priority audience might have a different call to action depending on
Hmm.
where they are in your journey, right?
Right.
I
Right.
want this person to just attend an event. I want this person to donate. I want this person to introduce me to their friend.
Hmm.
So thinking about them and what the call to action then can help you set your steps on moving them along to get to that point.
I think it's real, and I think I've lost track of the time, so we'll probably wrap up. But um, I think it's really critical to keep in mind how much of what you talked about was all about relationships, either the legit, like the specific relationship, or imagining a relationship between a an ideal audience member and the organization. Again, in the fundraising space, we talk all the time about relational fundraising. That's what we need to be doing. That we need to figure out a way to build community, to build relationship. We don't want to just be transactional. We
Hmm.
say that all the time, but it shows up on these calls. It shows up when we talked about grants, when we talked about capital campaigns. It was all about capital campaigns. When we talked about even direct marketing and special events. I mean, relationships comes up time and time again. So I think if you're watching this and you're maybe getting maybe you were overwhelmed by the tactical conversation. Like, I don't know how to film that much stuff. I just don't know how to do it. You're kind of getting caught up in that how question, the why questions behind your strategy. That's what we really want to start with. Like, start with that. Start with who you really want to be talking to and what you want them to do before you figure out the how. So, um, just fantastic stuff. Gladys, obviously, could talk to you all the time. Um, Tell the folks a little bit more about Mixte, about what you guys do, and how they can find you.
Yeah, Mixte Communications is a social justice marketing and PR agency. We do digital, PR, we do it all. We are all over the country, so we can be show up for you in different ways. But you can find us at gomixte.com. I am the director of communications there. And so I would love to connect with any of you. My name is Gladys. My email address is gladys@gomixte.com. Yeah, if you want to connect, also find me on LinkedIn. I love me some LinkedIn.
Love it. Love it. And we'll put a slide up at the end of this at the end of this video with Mixte's address and your email address and um, your LinkedIn handle as well, so people can find you. But Gladys, thanks again for being a part of this. I really love hearing your perspective on this. I think people who are watching this, remember, before you even start talking about tactics, really think about strategy, and that's something you can do right now with your team. You can get that done. You don't need a team of experts and 18 people with marketing degrees to help you with that. You can get started today, and that's really the heart of what we want to do with Try This First. So thanks for being a part of that. Thanks to all of you out there watching this. There's more to come on this channel, so stay tuned and keep up the great work, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye, everybody.